And it brings up this very interesting dynamic that's happening in the Republican presidential race right now, where Trump can insult everybody and criticize everyone, but as soon as he went after Cruz, things started to get a little dicey for him. And we wanted to bring in an expert in this matter, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and former presidential candidate. We're 2 weeks in front of Iowa. You've had to tread this line, Mr. Speaker. You've had to, be forcefully critical of your opponents, yet at the same time not alienate the base. What do you think of how Trump handled himself this weekend going after Cruz?
Well, I think he's focused way too much on Ted Cruz. And I think part of it is when you have a particular shtick, and the first couple times you do it, people go, wow, that's clever. But the 15th time you do it, so, he takes on Jeb Bush and says he's low energy, people go, boy, that was a good hit. Or he takes on Kasich, or he takes on Rand Paul. But when you see him go after, candidate after candidate, it gets a little stale. Second, I think he has stayed on Cruz way too long, partly because I think Trump doesn't realize how much he penetrates. I mean, if you have the kind of position, the kind of voice where virtually everybody's going to hear you, it's the difference between being on a Broadway stage where you have to really project and being on a big screen movie where if you try to do that, you look grotesque. And he's now too big. And so I think when he stays on this stuff, people begin to feel sympathetic for Cruz. The other thing that's coming on that we saw very much in 12, in 12, the number one characteristic Republicans wanted was to beat Obama. They did not want Republicans hurting each other and weakening the opportunity to beat Obama. I suspect you're seeing a growing desire to beat Hillary in a sense of, hey, you guys shouldn't be fighting each other because whoever gets the nomination needs to be strong enough to beat Hillary. And I suspect that's what's hitting him. My guess is, because he's a pretty clever guy, it won't take very many of his own crowds booing him to decide that technique's done. He can't use it anymore.
I'm sure you miss being in Iowa in January and February, don't you?
I don't know. You look at the temperature outside today, it feels like being in Iowa.
There is that. I'm curious about this Trump visit to Liberty University where he's talking to, it's a religious-based university. Everybody knows that. He goes there and he talks about, quoting from 2 Corinthians instead of, as most people would call it, 2 Corinthians. Now, it's a little gaffe, but that's a pretty big gaffe in front of that audience.
First of all, I'm not sure it's a gaffe. Point that Jerry Falwell Jr. made was there are, in fact, some denominations that say 2 instead of 2nd. I think if you were a normal Protestant audience, you thought, gee, that's a sign he's very comfortable with it. I'm not sure that's true, and I just don't know enough. But I was told that Reverend Falwell thought that in fact was not a big deal. The most amazing thing about his visit to Liberty was not what he said, it's what Jerry Falwell Jr. said, which is just an amazing introduction. Yeah. And part of which he said that his father had always told him, we're not voting for Sunday school teacher, we're voting for president. And sometimes you need a leader who may not fit exactly what you want in your Sunday school, but that's exactly who you need to lead the country. And I thought he was setting up a huge excuse for Trump in that introduction.
Newt Gingrich, you've been there before. Again, 2 weeks out. Things are starting to get tight. From your, you haven't endorsed anybody yet, right?
No, I'm not going to. These are all my friends, and I'm watching all my friends run like crazy.
So knowing that, and knowing that you're not actually in anybody's camp, I'd love for your analysis here of who you think has sort of the inside edge, not just for Iowa, but for New Hampshire, based on what you know can happen in such a short time in those 2 states.
Well, you just put your finger on the key thing, which is, in a primary where you don't have party loyalty to hold you to a candidate, people can switch with terrifying speed. I mean, it is amazing how fast it can turn around.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that Obama won Iowa, won into New Hampshire up 9 points, and lost by 3. And all that happened in 5 days.
Yep.
So I don't think you can tell. You also remember that you had a very, very long stretch where Howard Dean was the front runner, and then you had both John Kerry, who won, and you had Edwards, who came in a surprise, shocking second. All those things happened in the last 10 days. So I think you don't know what the dynamic is going to be. It's a little bit like when you go out to look for a new car. Lots of people may look for a new car and decide to visit, a Mercedes or a Ferrari or whatever when they're just looking. and then they get around to looking at their checkbook, and maybe they don't quite go back to the same dealership. Yeah. And I think what you have is a lot of people who are vaguely for Trump or they're vaguely for Cruz. Now they're about to think about actually voting, and you can see people shift pretty dramatically. And having said that, at the moment, remember, I've covered myself now because I said who knows, but at the moment it would appear that Iowa is a race between Trump and Cruz, although with the nastiness and all the stuff you're seeing, people could decide, hey, I want a third person. At the moment, Trump seems a clear leader in New Hampshire, and the fight seems to be for second place. But again, you got a long way to go to get there. Lots of things could happen. I can imagine futures anywhere from Trump sweeps both of them to Trump loses both of them. And I think it depends a lot on what the next 3 weeks are going to be like.
There was an incident where we did a prisoner swap with Iran and got some people back. I found it very interesting that happened with the help of Oman, who paid some money after we cut a deal to sell them some more weapons. Am I drawing conclusions here that perhaps I should not draw?
No, not necessarily. Look, I think that we have run a pretty loose alliance all across the Gulf states. Oman is one of them. They are terrified of the Iranians. They're also terrified of the terrorists. These are extraordinarily wealthy little countries that have a ruling class that is amazingly rich and amazingly insecure. And so they're constantly maneuvering and trying to figure out how to make nice to everybody because they're too tiny to fight. And so I think that what you have is you have a Obama administration that is desperate to find a way to be friends to Iran, no matter how bad Iran is. It fits the Obama worldview that somehow he's going to be the guy who brings Iran into the modern world and makes Iran a reliable ally. I mean, they tolerate stuff out of the Iranians that is just sick. And from the standpoint of the American media, for example, the pressure that was building on the White House over the Washington Post reporter was just getting bigger and bigger. So they had a real desire to solve this. I'm not quite as exercised by it as some of the presidential candidates. I don't think it's necessarily a terrible precedent, whereas I do think that the way that the sailors were treated was horrendous and should have led to some very, very strong American reaction because it was such a violation of international law and such a deliberate humiliation of the United States.
You know, we're almost out of time. In fact, we are out of time, but I'm gonna extend here. I know that you love animals, and I know that you like the National Zoo. Have you been to see Bebe?
I have not been up there yet. Clifton and I are going to go see Bebe, and I'm thrilled that the zoo has a baby panda, and I really think it's a great exhibit for people to go see. And as the weather gets warmer, there are a few nicer places in the Washington area than the National Zoo.
All right. Newt Gingrich, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And again, his book, the D.C. thriller titled Duplicity. You know, it's cold out. You go to the zoo. You know what you could do is just get yourself a nice panda fur skin coat to keep yourself warm. Just get what?
No, that's wrong.